Good morning, everyone. It is a very humid day here in Florida. Dr. Stillman will be joining me shortly. Testing out a new microphone setup today, as well as a new camera. So let me know if anything's like extremely silly. That would be very, very, very helpful. So the topic for today, what we're going to go over is I shared a couple articles. Dr. Stillman and I, we chat a lot since we do share a place together. And he did not realize the horse deaths that they had. It was a while back here with the Kentucky Derby. They had to put like 12 horses down at Churchill Downs. And so he asked me if I knew about it. And I said, yeah, obviously being from Kentucky, I trained a lot of horse people. I've got a lot of friends in the horse industry. And there's a couple other articles I shared down there. So this kind of relates to, we can relate this back to humans as well. If you're watching, go ahead and let me know if you can hear me okay. If everything looks good. I know I'm kind of in the shade, so trying a new camera and a new microphone. So let me know if the audio is okay. That would be great. That'd be helpful. Thank you. But basically, they had all these deaths with these horses, and I know a ton about the horse industry. One of my long-term clients that I had for 20 years was head of turf catering, which was a thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Turf catering, which is like a catering company for Keeneland, the racetrack, and is a family business. So his family had been in the horse business, the horse industry, catering business, and been around the horse industry for decades. And then also had a bunch of horse trainers I worked with that had horse farms. And it was interesting because we would talk. Thank you, Starlight. I appreciate you commenting. We would talk about the horse industry and a lot of the problems with the horse industry. And it relates a lot back to what's going on with humans as well, particularly kids. So now with these horses, they're judged on what they look like, not only how fast they run, but their appearance. And a lot of the older horse trainers would complain that these horses are coddled. They live in the barn all day. They don't get put out in the field. Years ago, these horses would be out playing with each other. They'd be roughhousing. They'd be doing all sorts of, out in the pasture. But now these horses, and a good friend of mine, Jackie Jolie, is actually a massage therapist for horses, believe it or not. And she's actually starting a company called Ecosol, which is basically creating red light blankets for horses and pets. Because as, people with pets, they live, most pets live indoors and air conditioning. They never go outside. So these red light products, but it goes back with kids as well. Like you're seeing a massive number of sports injuries now, like you've never seen before. And a lot of it is because kids don't play on their own. They don't spend enough time outside. They're in air conditioned homes. And then they go to a highly structured sporting practice. And these horses are the same. There's also an article I shared below called Animal Madness. And it talks about what happens when you take an animal out of its natural environment, you put it in a zoo. They get depression, they get anxiety, they can't reproduce. All the same things that are happening to humans now are basically being manifested in the horse industry, in zoos. And so it's really interesting. And Jackie, you can check her website out. It's Ecosol. There's a link below in the description. But how do you get these horse people that are so concerned about how the horse looks at auction that they don't put the horses out to pasture to let especially the young horses, and they're also running them at a really young age. And the same thing is with kids. We're specializing kids at such an early age. They haven't had the ability to basically build preparedness, to build the resilience in their body through play so they can handle the high stress of high level performance. Good morning, Dr. Stillman.
Good morning, everyone.
How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. How's everyone doing? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
They say my audio is good, so I'm trying out this new audio with the new camera. So.
Oh, great. Yeah, I see your camera. It's enormous.
Yes, it's large.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Like me.
It's a gym-sized camera.
It's a gym-sized camera.
Yeah.
That's true. So we were just talking about,
I heard. Yeah. And we see this all the time, right? I mean, and this is the thing that amazes us. And this is more what brought up this conversation topic this morning between you and I before we jumped on here is that, so many people are out there selling fear because fear sells on both sides of the aisle, conventional medicine, integrative, natural, alternative health. And there's a lot of truth to the scary things that you hear about everything from plastics to seed oils to whatever. But you can't control any of that. And the stress of fear is actually, I would argue, more dangerous to many people's health and well-being than the actual thing that they're afraid of. And we have no way to really know this. And this is one of the big problems with the fear, I don't know, beat, if I call it that, because what people don't realize and part of their anxiety about things that they're being told to be afraid of is that they can't quantify them. They don't know how big of a deal it is. So I just looked at some post today and it was like, oh, you got to stop using disposable, cups that are lined with plastic and have a plastic lid, such as you would get at every single coffee shop on planet Earth, at least the ones in the United States. I don't know about the other countries. And there's so much plastic in them and this plastic this and plastic that. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, okay, but what does the plastic really do to me? How do I know this? How do I quantify that? And I'm not saying plastic in your body, in your foods and beverages is good for you. I obviously believe that limiting plastic exposure is wise. But at the same time, is the 1 cup of coffee going through out of a plastic disposable cup going to kill you? I'm still here. And I can tell you that it's not. Is it going to impact your biology over long periods of time? Of course. But so many people that we see who are talking about fear, they don't ever explain to people how to be healthy and well. They just sell them more fear. And frequently with physicians, what this turns into is selling them fear and then selling them procedures, selling them ozone, selling them, high dose this or high dose that, selling them protocols. I have no problem with people doing that. But the problem is when somebody comes to me and they say, I've already seen so-and-so and such, and this other doctor, and I went through this, that, and the other protocol, and I've already spent all this money. And basically, sometimes they'll literally not quite say this way, but they'll basically say, can you do it on the cheap? Can you get me well without having me spend another 5-10 grand? Because I already went to fancy wellness doctor 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I basically blew my savings with them. And, again, I have no problem with anyone selling people medical care. But what will happen is as I interview them and as I talk to them, they make it very apparent to me that they have no fundamental habits that they need to be healthy. No one has ever talked to them about what they are actually eating every single day. No one has ever counseled them about everything from EMF to their light environment, to sauna, to light therapy, to how much salt they should eat, to this, to that, to the other thing. And then we take their case on, remotely. We're doing a lot of coaching rather than doctoring, and we'll get better results than people who are running around sticking needles into people and infusing them with tens of thousands of dollars worth of whatever. And, I just think it's putting the cart before the horse to go with really expensive stuff that comes in a bag or a box or a bottle when you can learn how to be healthy and a lot of your problems will disappear. And a lot of the things one of the things that sparked this conversation between us today was, the threat of potential nanotechnology, which, I know nothing about. I know very little about nanotechnology. But just going back to the basics and the fundamentals, right? Nanotechnology has to get into your body somehow. So regardless of whether you're afraid of viruses or bacteria or nanotechnology or toxins or any of the other things that could invade your body and make you sick and stupid and whatever, just focus on keeping your body healthy. And then all the orifices and membranes and structures of your body will be strong. And then they will do what they're supposed to do, which is protect you from all those things. And yet we have all these people coming to us who are like, I live indoors, I have no idea what I'm eating, and I don't know why I'm sick. And we're like, well, we're going to explain it to you, and you're going to do these things. And if you do these things, you can reliably count on getting better. If you don't want to do these things, don't count on getting well, because that's the power of the fundamentals.
Absolutely. And it's called first world problems, right? 50, 70 years ago, We didn't have to, horses did what they did, 50, 70 years
Right.
ago, humans did what they did. They went outside and played. We've created this artificial environment, this artificial planet with artificial sun, with climate controlled environments that have downstream side effects. And so the key is how do you get people to get enough of nature back into their life? Like, how do you convince these horse trainers to let their horses pasture more, let the horse develop for another year instead of racing it young, let the horses play outside. They might get nicked up a little bit. If I'm buying a horse, I'm going to look for the horse that's nicked up a little bit, because I know it's going to be more durable, right? I know it's played, it's been roughhoused. A lot of these horses look like exotic sports cars that are perfect, right?
Right.
So, it's the same thing with humans. We've created an artificial world that doesn't really agree with our biology and makes our biology weak and vulnerable. So it's about systematically teaching people how to get themselves back out in nature, how to basically apply the appropriate stresses for our immune system and our biology so that it can be healthy to withstand a lot of this stuff that is being thrown at us.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the key.
And it's really that simple. People just don't understand that the environment that they're spending 90% of their day in is causing the majority of problems for them, from psychological issues to reproductive problems, blood sugar control, and add the garbage foods. The food industry has no incentive to make you eat less.
Right.
Designing foods that make you eat more.
Right. And they're also, as I've mentioned before, I think on this podcast, protein is expensive, whether it's vegetable protein, let alone animal protein. So the processed foods, they skimp on the protein, which is one of the reasons why one of our first things that we focus on with people is increasing their protein intake to an appropriate load so that they can actually have the appropriate hormone, neurotransmitter responses, so they can have healthy skin, hair, nails, bodily tissues.
Or they dump a bunch of soy protein, which is, in Eastern culture is a condiment, and in Western culture is a waste product. So they dump that in there. To basically, hey, we're, whatever this waste in Western society usually ends up in your water or your food at some point, whether it's fluoride or whether it's the seed oils or, soy protein. We're going to show one study in postmenopausal women that showed a positive result for postmenopausal women, but we're going to give it to everybody.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but the way that the studies are gamed, rigged, manufactured, engineered to suit the agendas of the powers that be is just, I would actually say it's getting more and more obvious. They're being even less subtle about it. And it was a big problem 10, 20, 30 years ago.
I've had a number of clients in the last couple of weeks reach out to me that used to think I was a lunatic, because I've been talking about this stuff since like the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
Because I saw a lot of stuff in my young age, and I read a lot of things and talked to a lot of people. And, I would talk about a lot of these things that are happening and were going to happen. They'd be like, dude, there's no way that'll ever happen. And they call me and they're like, dude, I can't believe you're actually right. They're like, it's happening, and people are starting to see it. I mean, you can't hide it anymore. In fact, it's so obvious that they're not hiding it anymore.
I know it.
It's like, you're either going to follow our agenda or you're done, like we're going to cut you off. And that's why it's so important to control what you can control, create community, eat simple food, try and buy things from local farmers, support local farmers, really focus on getting outside, because the sun is so protective to you and your biology.
It is. If there's one thing we see people who are struggling with their health not doing, it's getting outside.
And find a way to manage technology. Like, make sure that, simple things like you did, like plugging a timer in,
right,
that turns off automatically. If you're in the middle of a call, you're in the middle of a call. Like, that's just the way it goes. Like, this is when we're done. No more Wi-Fi.
Right.
There's some technology that I'm going to be trying here soon, that I've heard a lot of good things from different people about that's supposed to help mitigate a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to be interested in trying that. But, controlling it as much as you possibly can, especially by getting out in nature, is going to make you more resilient than the majority of the population.
Right. Exactly. Did you talk already about the wireless transponders on the racehorses? I thought that was a really interesting story.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
There's a question for you later when you're ready.
I see it. Yeah. So, I saw this story yesterday. Jim had already heard about it. And that's what sparked our conversation about horses that he led off the recording today with. But horses, as the article, and this article comes from Arthur Furstenberg. He writes a newsletter. It's a cell phone task force, is I think what he calls it. And I found it through Tess Laurie over on Substack. If you want to know where I saw this and who I'm reading. And the article was about deaths in racehorses at Churchill Downs in Kentucky. And I didn't even know that it was an old article or an old story, but Jim has obviously roots in Kentucky and friends in Kentucky, as he mentioned. And so he knew about that story when it was breaking 2-3 months ago, Jim?
Yeah. Whenever the Kentucky Derby was.
Right. And it was a startling increase in the number of racehorses that either suffered an injury or just collapsed and died and had to be euthanized, which is really sad. They're such beautiful animals. Everyone loves horses. Some people irrationally so. And what Furstenberg points out is that this is
like the Mongols. The Mongols love their horses.
Yeah. Furstenberg points out is that this is the first time that these horses had been wearing wireless technology that was tracking their performance. This is one reason why you won't catch Jim or I wearing a fitness tracker that doesn't have an airplane mode. And I'll test my trackers, I'll test my devices and make sure they're not transmitting when I don't want them transmitting. This is the Oura Ring on my finger, and it's got a great airplane mode, runs for 7 days without charging. And people, think that, particularly when we started talking about this years ago, people thought we were nuts. But now you see more and more and more people who say things like, yeah, I turned off my Wi-Fi, I turned off this, I turned off that, and I felt so much better. And it's because of
wearing my Apple Watch.
Yeah, it's because of how bad the electrosmog is getting in the environment. And, people, this increase in deaths of these animals was very profound. It was something like a 12.5-fold increase. It's a very significant increase. And what I want people to know who are worried about the state of the world, who feel like there's nothing they can do, is to understand that when really bad things happen, like this incident at Churchill Downs, the best thing you can do is access the curiosity of the people who are trying to solve the problem and present them with a possible hypothesis. Most of them are going to blow you off. Get over it, move on, find somebody else. Because people who are going to survive are going to be open-minded, they're going to be critical thinkers, and they're going to figure out what's actually good and what's bad, regardless of what the herd is doing. And those are the people you have to focus on, because they end up becoming the leaders and the thinkers and the people who define what becomes normal in society. We're unfortunately in a time when I think, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, where the reigning paradigm is really about to topple. This whole idea that we can get away with infinite amounts of pharmaceutical drugs, of electromagnetic pollution, of chemical pollution of all kinds, heavy metals, petroleum toxins, biotoxins, all these things, the public is waking up to the fact that this just isn't sustainable with life. And that's part of the infertility crisis. The infertility crisis is the rude awakening to those who really just don't want to look at how nature actually functions. And I talked about that in my bioidentical hormones masterclass on Monday, and how the infertility crisis is spurring the infertility industry, which has no incentive to cure infertility or prevent it. They have an incentive to deliver babies to people who are struggling with their fertility. And the cost of that industry is insane. $50,000, $100,000 per kid. And it's set to, the growth in that industry is high single or low double digits, which is an incredible rate of growth. And people need to know that this all goes back to just very simple things applied consistently applied consistently throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout your life without compromise.
Well, they're going to be pushing babies in a petri dish here soon. They've already started to do that. The designer babies,
Crazy.
Problem, solution, make money. And people are starting to realize that the endless money printing can't go on forever either.
Right.
So there's a lot of paradigms that are starting to unravel. Unfortunately, many of the solutions that these psychopaths are presenting
and
actually
narcissists. Don't forget the narcissists.
And make the problem worse.
Right.
Let's block out the sun to fix climate change.
Right.
Or, let's force everyone to drive electric vehicles, which is actually harder on the environment than driving a gasoline vehicle.
Right.
What most people don't understand is it's not about the environment. It's about getting as many people away from having their own vehicle as possible. Because if people don't have their own vehicle, it's so much easier to control people.
And while we're busy ruining our chances of making it with the algorithm, with what we say, we'd love it if you would like our videos, share them, subscribe, because otherwise, people just don't find out about this stuff and then they get sick and die young and wonder why.
Well, yeah. And then ask questions, like the most important thing today is to keep yourself healthy enough that you can be a critical thinker and that you just don't run with the herd.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's the key. Like everything in our society, the media, the phones, everything is to develop that fear porn herd mentality. So you literally have to work at choosing not to do that. And part of the way you do that is being mentally healthy, which comes from getting outside, eating good food, having good friends. And then when you do talk to people, asking them questions, making them think, that's all part of it.
That's right. And also being compassionate and patient with them when they choose not to think. Because if you're very harsh and you're cutting a lot of people off in a rude way, they're never going to come back to you. You're actually worsening the chances of them ever figuring out what they're doing wrong. And if you're patient with them and you're kind to them and you're understanding, eventually they'll come back to you and they'll say, you know what, you were right about that. And that's a key part of what Jim just alluded to minutes ago. He said, my clients from years ago who thought I was nuts started coming back to me recently and saying, you were right about that. People don't do that if you're rude to them, because it's embarrassing.
Well,
you have
to
be gracious in order for people to admit that.
That was a very different time too. That was 15, 20 years ago when you could disagree with someone, even on a contentious issue.
Sure.
And they would just smile and go, I don't agree with you.
Absolutely.
Now, if you disagree with somebody, they're not only going to be contentious, a lot of them will be hateful and call you all sorts of names.
Right.
Clint, soy protein powders are rubbish, even non-GMO. My personal opinion on that would be absolutely, especially if you're a dude, you don't want phytoestrogens. The worst thing you can do, if you want to really mess up your young child, give them formula with soy protein in it, like a male, not good. So, in small amounts, it's just the worst form of protein that you could choose.
You have to understand historically the context of this food. So it's a food that became popular in a place where population densities were extremely high, where there was an abundance of sunlight, so you could grow foods like this, and where the population really didn't have great sources of protein. And that meant that any kind of source of protein became something that people would gravitate to. And so what did they do with soy? They didn't eat soy raw. Eating soy raw is not a good strategy for health, especially in a world loaded with estrogen mimicking compounds that are already increasing that burden of toxic whatever on your endocrine system, right? So what did they do? They would ferment it. They would ferment it into natto. They would ferment it into miso. They would ferment it into tofu, and they would ferment it into tempeh, if I'm recalling correctly. And the key there is that when you ferment something, you break down a lot of the stuff in it that the plant loads into it to poison you. Because remember, plants don't make nuts and seeds and legumes for us to eat. They make them to make more plants. And this is one reason why you don't see people eating things like black bean sprouts. They're poison. You can get away with sprouting some nuts and seeds and eating them raw, largely because you're tricking the plant into germinating it. but this isn't across the board something that you can do. So would I eat soy protein powder if it was like the last food in the pantry? Sure, because I don't want to starve to death. But you're going to find that there is, and this also goes back to what Jim and I talk about all the time, which is what are your goals, right? If your goal is to gain mass, if your goal is to have, a lot of muscular strength, then I don't think soy protein powders are recommended by anyone who's really serious and expert in the bodybuilding, powerlifting, weightlifting, weight training, whatever world. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Jim?
It's very fair to say, yes.
And there are vegan bodybuilders out there who will do it with soy protein. And good luck to them.
There also might be a few other factors as well involved there.
You mean the performance-enhancing drugs, Jim?
Yes.
Are you suggesting that people are telling people that they can eat things to look a certain way when in fact they don't actually, it's not actually possible to just eat that a certain way to look a certain way? You have to use performance-enhancing drugs?
Well, yeah, like certain primal people that make a lot of noise and scream a lot.
Oh boy, what a funny world we live in.
Well, it's really funny because he claims he's primal, and he basically said he was natural for years and years and years, and then finally he consulted with a coach that I know that outed him, and he was taking massive amounts of performance-enhancing drugs. Not only that, is he was eating massive amounts of all the foods he says not to eat. Because having a primal lifestyle, you are going to look nothing like that.
Right. You look at the Maasai. The Maasai are incredibly lean. The Maasai, the average BMI might be like 19.
Well, they're not incredibly jacked. They're lean, they're muscular, but they're not super physiologically
and they have
jacked.
A very high density of mitochondria.
Right.
And that's the difference between having muscles that look big but can't do a lot of work and having muscles that are lean and toned but can do far more work because they have a higher mitochondrial density.
Well, it's a total disadvantage. Like even for me, if in a survival situation, I'm at a huge disadvantage because I have such higher energy demands.
Right.
Like if you look like a pro bodybuilder in a survival situation, you're finished. Like you're not going to make it. You want to be a smaller, like that's why all these people from Nepal and all these different places, they're really hot and there's not a lot of food. They're tiny people, right? It's just like the Corolla versus the Mack truck, right? If there's a fuel shortage, you want the Corolla, not the Mack truck,
right?
So it's really interesting that people, and too, I get frustrated with people on Instagram that are photoshopping their photos and they're
lies.
They're telling people I did
lies.
This. Celebrities is the worst because you got these celebrities like, what did I do? I trained 3 times a day. I ate chicken and rice for 4 months and I turned into this beast. And they didn't tell you about all the pharmaceuticals they did in order for them to get away with that, right?
That's exactly
and normal people think that they just need to eat chicken and rice and train multiple times a day, and then they end up with a train wreck because they're not honest.
That's it.
Well, and that's one more thing about the horse industry. One of the things that's also hurt the horses is the actual removal of performance-enhancing drugs from their training protocol.
Really?
Because what happens is when you're under a lot of stress, and it's the same for humans.
Yeah.
When you're under a lot of stress and you're training really hard, your appetite at a certain point starts to go down. So these horses are training really hard. They're under a lot of stress. Their appetite starts going down. So things like anabolics like equipoise actually increase appetite and would keep these horses eating. And they would also help them recover faster. It's kind of like, these athletes that are traveling all around the world and they're having to take weed to sleep. And then their hormones start going in the tank. So they start taking a little testosterone or growth hormone to help them recover. So what happens is if you're constantly beat up and you're traveling and you're under a ton of chronic stress and your hormone profile bottoms out, instead of letting them give these horses some things to help them recover and to increase their appetite, they've cut all that stuff out. And there is some abuse, of course. But most of those guys are really smart about the application of that stuff because they don't want to kill the horse, right? So that's a big part of it as well, is the removal of performance-enhancing drugs from the horse racing industry. Is that it's affected their horses in a big way.
Wow. So question from James, is it okay to take 3 milligrams of melatonin in the evening to aid in sleep? I'm a 60-year-old man. So this is a great example of a question that I often get. And the number one thing that I want people to know about melatonin is that it isn't made in your body, or it's not supposed to be obtained by your body by taking a pill. And the ways that you can massively boost melatonin are all the things that are in the Fundamentals of Wellness, the course that Jim and I run, where we coach people into being as healthy and resilient and robust as possible, and help them understand how to navigate this crazy topsy-turvy, whatever world that we're living in. Briefly, though, when you increase your protein intake, you're going to increase your melatonin because you need the protein from tryptophan and phenylalanine in order to feed down into that pathway. You also need the micronutrients like B6 and magnesium and zinc from protein sources in order to make things like melatonin, let alone your other neurotransmitters, right? You need red and infrared light. You need bright light during the day. All these things will help trigger melatonin synthesis, which will improve sleep. And then you need to restore and maintain your proper circadian rhythms, which means blue blocking glasses at night and low blue light bulbs in the home, and mitigation of and avoidance of screen time after dark. So I usually say 3 to 4 hours before bed, you're either not using any screens or you're limiting the screen use. And if you are using it, you're wearing blue blockers, because none of the light filters really do a good enough job for me to protect your circadian rhythms. Then you got to go ahead and carve out adequate amounts of sleep. Taking melatonin and sleeping 6 hours a night, you might feel better, you might get better rest, but this is not a good long-term strategy. Melatonin is not some magical pill or magical substance that's just going to fix problems that are fundamentally due to a lack of time and a poor lifestyle. Okay. So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg for melatonin. And do I use it supplementally? Yes. 3 milligrams of melatonin. I think it's Russell Ryder who basically did the most melatonin research of anyone living. I believe Russell's still with us, although he's very old. I think he's in his 90s. If you want to read his book, Russell Ryder, it's just called Melatonin, if I recall correctly. And it's a great read, pretty easy to understand, very interesting. I think it's a very engaging book, unlike a lot of scientific works that I read. And he's come down on the side of using supplemental melatonin. He believes it's going to be one of the key supplements for anti-aging and longevity. I tend to agree with him. And it's one of very few supplements that I can't find a reason not to use long-term in people. So, my answer to this generally for patients, and I'm not giving you medical advice, James, just for the record, I'm just giving you education and understanding and context and background. I don't see a problem with people taking 3 milligrams of melatonin at night. I will say that I think that doing this is a big mistake if you're not doing everything to optimize your melatonin production throughout your body and not just in your pineal gland during the day. And on that note, Jim, I think we might as well wrap it up. What do you think?
Well, I just want to summarize that up really quickly. So it's a tool, right? And if you're living life like a dumpster fire, if you're spending your whole day indoors in front of blue light and you're eating like garbage, you're not getting your morning light, and you're taking that melatonin because you can't sleep because you're on a screen till 11 o'clock at night and you think it's going to help you. It's kind of like metformin and diabetics. If you manage your diabetes with metformin, in time you're going to run into trouble, right? Metformin improves outcome in type 2 diabetics. The problem with the type 2 diabetics is they don't manage their insulin with sunlight and exercise and a good diet. The metformin actually becomes almost like a life extension drug. It becomes like an anti-aging drug if it's taken in an insulin controlled environment. The problem is these people are dumpster fires and they're trying to control the dumpster fire with a pill instead of controlling the dumpster fire with their lifestyle. So if you're living a horrible lifestyle and you take melatonin just to make you feel better, it's not going to end well for you. But if you're using melatonin as a reset from time to time or as a supplement, but your lifestyle is good, you're going to get much better results.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Check out our Fundamentals of Wellness course plus coaching in the link tree below. Jim, anything else you want to add?
Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great
Take
day,
care,
everyone. We'll
everyone.
see you tomorrow. If you have any questions, too, by the way, that topics you'd like us to cover, just put them in the comments, and we'll get to that.